Hello, and we're here to discuss a celebration of life event, the life of Phil Haney, author of See Something, Say Nothing, a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security, and just a all-around great human being. And with me today is Ron Branstner, who also knew Phil Haney intimately and was a close friend and confidant. And we're just here to talk about the life of Phil Haney and celebrate his memory. And uh, Ron, what would you have to say about the life of Phil Haney? You met him so many times when he came here to Minnesota. He was a special guy.
Amigo.
Amigo.
That's what he called me. It was his favorite word. In fact, he called a lot of people amigo. And if nobody knows what that means, it means my friend. So you'd always say, "Thanks a lot, amigo." So that's the first thing that stands out when I talk about when I mention Phil is he had a he had a little bit of a dry sense of humor, but it was a humor that at first I didn't catch on to it. I thought, who is this guy? He had said something to me the first time I met him because I was complimenting him. This was in up in uh, Browerville, and he came up there and doing a presentation in front of about 100 people, and I said something to him like I really appreciate it and whatever. And he came back to me with some kind of a corny sense of humor. I'm looking at him like, seriously, But then after I got to know him, I knew what he meant by that. But I was like, so that would be the first thing I would say because it took me a while. I went to many different presentations. In fact, give you a little story. One night I was supposed to speak in the Spicer area at a church, and we had about 250, 300 people in the audience, and I was just about to go on, I believe, in a couple hours, and I had heard that Phil was in the area, and I said, no, I said, I called him up and said, Phil, you're in the area. I'm giving up my night to you. And he was in the Wilmer area, and he came over there and he spoke in front of 250 people, and to me that was I would rather have listened to him than get up there and speak because Phil had a way about him, a good reputation, plus he had a lot of knowledge, and I learned from him, and he knew that, and we had some good times together. So that's one of the special moments that I got a chance to give up a very big venue and give it up to him when I found out he was in town. So uh, nice guy.
It's interesting how far he would drive to speak in front of people. And he came once to a church down here in the Rochester area and said a few words while Usama Dakdak was the main speaker at a church. Maybe you were along that night, Ron. I don't
No,
remember, but
nobody,
he touched the lives of a lot of people, and what a compassionate person too. That sense of humor was funny, a little bit corny, like I couldn't quite figure out what the
yeah.
jokes were always about. Like, he would say, let there be flagons of ale, like when we would talk about having a beer or something in a bar. And he was really looking forward to meeting all the characters involved in the last midterm election after the night of the Trump rally in Rochester. We drove over to a local bar and we hung out with Doug Wardlow and some other characters who were around at the time. But did you guys did you have an opportunity to ask him some questions that were important to you? Did he give you insights about what were
Yeah.
interest points of interest to him?
Well, there's some history here too. So just to give you a little bit of background history, Phil was doing speaking engagements all throughout the Midwest here, especially in Minnesota. His whole goal, after getting to know him, and I'll get to that story in a bit, was to come to Minnesota in his camper, and he was staying at different locations. And his whole goal was to make sure that Keith Ellison would not make Attorney General, and he gave up a dedicated I believe it was 5 months of his life, and a lot of people do not realize this about Phil. he would call his wife every night. His wife was ailing; she was sick, and he would make sure that he called her every night. Him and I sat and talked about that. It was tough for him to be away from his wife, and his, it ended up being some of their last months, but his dedication and his devotion to her was astounding. But he also had a dedication to Minnesotans that people do not understand. He came here to give a lot of his life to something that we don't understand how important it was. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, but there's people don't understand our liberties were on the line, and they are still on the line, and he knew this. And I'm going to share that with you a little bit. But that is, so he was doing presentations throughout Minnesota. At one time, him and the Honorable James Simpson, who also is a very good friend of mine, they toured together. And I tell you, if Phil was alive now, I know what he would say. He would say, "Yeah, but that dang Jim gave me the coronavirus. I was sick for the whole time we toured because they were sick. He was sick the whole time. They were going to events and they were coughing all over each other, living in the same room, and they barely could. At one point, I went to an event and I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Jim. Jim was just pretty sick, but they were touring all over to give up 5 months of his life to dedicate it to Minnesota. So at one point, I was speaking in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I was going there to speak on free speech and hate speech. And by the time I got there, they shut the event down by some politicians to make sure that nobody could speak there. Ended up being, not only did they shut me down, and we ended up going outside of town, but they shut Phil, Haney, and James Simpson down also, and made it so they could not speak there. So I called Jim and Phil up and told them, and of course, we had the same banter going on because how dare they shut down free speech in Sioux Falls? This is after the incident with the gun incident with Sharam Haney. So
Sharam Haney and Brannon House and VCY America Radio, they had an enormous event set up there, and the Muslim showed up with guns, and he was live streaming on Facebook. And I remember that whole call-in campaign to the Secretary of State of South Dakota or the Attorney General of South Dakota and the Sheriff's Department to say, why haven't you arrested this guy for the threatening statements? He actually went into the venue and he was kicked out of the venue. Then he went back to his car and again was live streaming on Facebook. And all of those things were going on at that time. So to shut down a free speech event was really a major, problem at the time.
It's interesting because the free speech was about the First Right Amendment. It wasn't about anything but talking about the First Right Amendment. We got shut down. So this is the power of what Phil was trying to relay to us that was coming here, along with Brandon House and Shram Hadian and Usama Doc and Jim Simpson. They were the Paul Revere's. They were warning us, they're coming and they're coming. And a lot of people don't understand the ramifications that are about to come still out of this. Phil and I sat down one night, believe it or not, on September 25th, 2018. And we sat down and, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I totally lost power. I don't know why, but
you're plugged in.
Yep. Well, I can't see you, but
you can't see me.
You're back. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Ron, you froze up now. Now it's at my end. You froze up. I'll save this portion and then call you back. Okay?